There we go. Excellent. Well, here in Ballina today with the Emergency Services Minister, Steph Cook. We have the SES Deputy Commissioner, Damien Johnson, the Resilience Regional Coordinator, Gary McKinnon, the local member for Ballina, Tamara Smith, Sharon Coldwater, the Mayor of Ballina Shire. We have from Fire and Rescue, Stephen Hunt, the Deputy Commissioner of RFS, Kyle Stewart, and the Unit Commander here at Ballina, Jerry Burnich, will also speak, but we're also blessed to be here with so many of the volunteers from the SES. And from my perspective today, with the Minister, it's been a great opportunity to go out to some of the evacuation centres here in Ballina and meet with many people who have gone through an incredibly tough time. I must say, their spirits are incredibly high. Their spirits are high, and what we've seen here in Ballina is the great Australian spirit. We've seen so many people come forward, whether they're registered volunteers through the SES, the RFS or any other government organisation. We've just seen members of the public come together and lend a hand. It has been flat out here for the last 5 days, and it's been an absolute team effort. And to me, it just demonstrates why we should all be proud to be Australians, because this coming together of community spirit and looking out for our neighbours and getting through, even speaking to many people who still don't know if their homes will be there when they get back or what the extent of that damage will be. So many people just saying, well, you know, there's worse people off than I am, and the concern for other people, for others, particularly in Lismore, Kawakawa, other areas around the Northern Rivers who are also doing it incredibly tough. For those who have gone through a very difficult time, from my perspective as Premier and up here with the Minister, we'll be doing everything we can. We're currently dealing with the immediate. We're dealing with the shock of the situation. We're dealing with getting people back on their feet into housing. We're still in a situation here in Ballina where telecommunications are down through much of the Northern Rivers. But we will get through this, and then the long journey of the rebuild begins. I want to particularly thank, I had a great opportunity to privately meet with members of the SES here. You know, they have done an absolutely amazing job, just like our members of the State Emergency Services right across our state during this difficult time. But they've been run off their feet. They don't know what day it is. It's all become one. And to hear the stories of the calls that they've had to make, not knowing if the person that they're speaking to at the other end is the last call they'll ever make. It's been incredibly emotional, but they remain incredibly strong, and it's the spirit of the people behind me that I think makes everything great about our state here in New South Wales. And I know as Premier, by speaking to them, it's their courage, it's their bravery, it's their spirit of service that demonstrates why we've been able to get through what has been an incredibly difficult period of time over the last few years. Whether it's been floods, fires, drought, floods again, the pandemic, our people stand strong. And from a government perspective, we're going to be here every step of the way, because yes, there are temporary issues, housing issues, telecommunication issues. The clean-up is now beginning right up here in the Northern Rivers area. Many communities are still isolated, and we're trying to get in as many of them while we're up here. But we will get through this. It's going to be a journey, it's going to be a long road, but I have complete confidence, not just based on what I believe the government response will be in making sure we put every single dollar in helping every single person get through this, every single business getting back on its feet. It's going to be a tough journey, but what fills me with confidence is the spirit of the local community, but ultimately the spirit of the volunteers that we have. Someone came across the road earlier on today, and he was talking about the need for better government coordination. He said, you know what steps up when that's not in place, when these shock 1 in 500 year floods occur, the community steps up. And the community, this place in many ways has been run by volunteers for the last week. They've been non-stop since Sunday, and they're still here today taking calls. We had telecommunication systems down. We went back to the old ways of doing things up here, and they did it. And they rescued many people, saved many lives. And that's a testament to each of the people behind me, the entire teams who have been here. Some of the people behind me have also lost their homes, and they're here and have been here for 5 days, 6 days during that period of time, not looking after themselves, looking after the people in their community. And that gives me great hope in terms of the recovery that will come next, and that I know the communities of the Northern Rivers, including right here in Ballina, will come out stronger the other side. A couple of other points. There's a few speakers today. Yesterday we had the first meeting of the Crisis Policy Committee, which went through an entire coordination as we moved through. Certainly acknowledgement. The key ministers in the government who have portfolio responsibilities for the recovery and beyond know that there is a long journey ahead, and the expectation that the government will be there every step of the way to help our communities through. We made a decision yesterday that we'll be appointing a Minister for Flood Recovery. That minister will be sworn in as soon as she can get back to Sydney, and that will be Steph Cook, in addition to her roles as the Emergency Services Minister. She will be the Minister in charge of flood recovery for our state, in coordinating all the various agencies, all the various issues that occur across the board. We've done that in the past, and I think it's incredibly important that the public service understand that there is a key person who doesn't just coordinate from a ministerial perspective those areas of the government, but in addition to that, all ministers in my cabinet who will have a role to play in ensuring that every single person gets through this difficult time. Finally, I'd like to make the point that we're obviously still seeing difficult conditions right across our state. This flood event, wherever you are in New South Wales, is not over. Please do not be complacent. When there are evacuation warnings in place, please follow those instructions. When there are evacuation orders in place, please leave. Please don't drive through floodwaters. But we expect to see flash flooding over the course of the week. I think Sydney, could have been much worse yesterday. We're very fortunate that it was not as bad as we anticipated. Obviously, we are still concerned about the Hawkesbury and the Nepean area and flash flooding in other areas, and including particularly the Central Coast and Hunter regions. Steph Cook will provide some further information to that, but it's not the time to be complacent. Following those instructions helps save lives, protects you and your family, and particularly in addition to that as well, protects these guys behind me. The guys who put their life on the line protecting people and keeping them safe. And the best thing that we can do to help those volunteers that every single day put their life on the line to look after us is to follow the instructions that they provide, the advice that they're providing in, and that will ensure that we continue to get through this. So finally, I just want to say, today being here is difficult. It certainly gives me a great perspective of the challenges that have been faced over the past 6 days, and more importantly, the challenges that we'll face over the many long months ahead. But we will get through this. The spirit is high. I just want to end hearing some of the stories today and the emotion that many of these members have gone through in saving lives and putting their lives on the line to get people through. In some ways, though, fills me with great spirit, knowing that the Australian spirit is alive and well in Ballina and growing across our state. Now I'm going to pass to Steph Cook. So Steph will speak. Then we'll hear from Gary McKinnon, because the obviously coordination will now be occurring in terms of the recovery in New Zealand. New South Wales will be playing a role in that. Tamara Smith, the local member for Ballina, will then speak in terms of the challenges in the local area and what her team and what she's seen on the ground over the past week or so. And then I think it would be important to hear from Jerry Burnage, who's the commander here, because I think there's nothing better than to hear from a person who's led such a great team here on the ground in Ballina, saving lives and getting people through. Yeah.
Thank you, Premier. Well, I'm both honoured and humbled to accept the role of Minister for Flood Recovery. The Premier and Deputy Premier spoke to me about this important role yesterday, and I'm all too happy to take it on despite the challenges that we see and are in front of us. These communities have been through a hell of a lot. From surviving the initial emergency, we have a long road of recovery ahead, and I'm determined to make sure that every single person gets back on their feet as quickly as possible. It is my privilege to lead a multi-agency response, both in relation to the emergency itself and now as we turn our attention to the recovery space, to ensure that all government departments right across government are working closely with the federal government, with our other agencies, with the not-for-profit sector, with companies, with non-government organisations and local government and the community itself, to ensure that no one is left behind, to ensure that we get our communities back on track as quickly as possible. I also want to pay tribute once again to the incredible courage of our volunteers across all of the emergency services organisations. I have the great honour and privilege of being here today with the RFS and supporting, of course, our SES, our local SES, and they have been working around the clock for days and days and days. They're sleep deprived. They're just hanging in there, but they are staying strong, and I know, coming from their ranks, that they will see this through right to the end. In the toughest of moments, all you have to do is look in their eyes and give them a hug, and you instantly feel inspired and able to pick up and carry on. And I really want to say thank you and really express that deep gratitude that I know people across this community have, but in fact people right across New South Wales have that deep gratitude they have for our SES volunteers, and of course so wonderfully supported by the RFS, by Fire and Rescue New South Wales, by New South Wales Ambulance, by New South Wales Police. We've got the Volunteer Rescue Association, Surf Life Saving New South Wales and Marine Rescue New South Wales. These are the organisations that make up the emergency services in New South Wales. Some 176,000 volunteers right across those services, and we've all stood firm behind the SES during this time, helped out wherever we can. But of course, it's been in partnership with what are truly wonderful communities. The spirit that I've seen in these communities today, it's just breathtaking, absolutely incredible. And spending time in the evacuation centres with both volunteers, with people leading the effort to set them up and make sure people are looked after, right through to spending time with people that are spending some time there now, and just hearing their stories about how the floodwaters came up so quickly, and just how deeply grateful they are now to be where they are. They're safe, they've got clean and fresh bedding, they've got clean clothes, they're being fed, and that great Aussie spirit that says, well, it doesn't matter how bad it is for me, what about Lismore? You know, what about these other places? They just kept mentioning it over and over again. And that's the Aussie spirit that I love to see come through, and that's what we're seeing on the ground here today. So as we turn our attention to the recovery efforts, we've really stood up the recovery efforts now in full. The cleanup is underway. SES are stepping in to do those disaster assessments that are required, ensuring that streets and homes are safe before people can return, that is happening at a real pace now, which is fantastic to see. Over the last 24 hours, we've seen right across the Northern Rivers region an extra 900 or so people come into this area from out of area, whether that's with the SES, Fire and Rescue, the RFS of course, and well supported by the ADF. So they've all got taskings now. Resilience New South Wales are our lead agency in this space. They are responsible for the coordination of all of our agencies to ensure that we meet people exactly where they are on their journey to give them the help that they need when they need it. So we're firmly in that space now, and I can reassure the people of this community and the communities right up and down the coast of New South Wales in relation to the flooding that we have seen over the past 5 days. I will continue to work day and night to ensure that our communities get back on their feet as quickly as possible. It's a great honour and privilege for me to have been appointed into this ministry, and I'll absolutely give it my level best every single day. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Minister Premier. On behalf of Resilience New South Wales, we'd just like to say we're really deeply concerned and think about all the people of the Northern Rivers and the things they've been through the last 4 to 5 days. Really difficult and challenging circumstances, obviously, but the scale and the breadth of the impact has been something that we haven't seen before, and we all know that. Some of these people we know over the last few years, as the Premier said, they've been through fires, they've been through droughts, they've been floods, and now more floods with COVID in between. So the compounding impact for so many people in the Northern Rivers is going to create an extra set of challenges and an extra set of dimensions for the long-term mental well-being for a lot of these community members. For Resilience New South Wales, working with the existing combat agency SES, we're still, I might say, responding to some efforts at the moment, so we need to acknowledge that. But as we transition into a recovery phase, as the Minister said, we need to make sure we really join up and link up all parts of the community, all parts of government, all levels of government, and make sure we include the community at the heart of that. We keep our focus of community and make sure we do everything we can together for community to ensure that we take them through the journey from today, right through to some of them will be many years to come. Some will be able to return to homes, some will not be able to return to homes, and we'll have to think about the challenges that will be for some, and that will be a large challenge. But I know the Department of Community Justice and other government agencies are already starting to consider what the scale and breadth of what that may look like. From a short-term emergency perspective for accommodation, we have been able to achieve a small win. We've been able to secure the Office of Sport and Rec here at Lennox Head, and there's a small number of cabins which are used for school children for their different events. But we've got families going in there today, and we're really proud to see that families with young children as young as 4 weeks old that need somewhere safe and somewhere secure with their parents to stay overnight. And that will scale up over the next 24 hours to get more people in that location, and then other emergency accommodation locations as we start to identify them. The challenge is, of course, there are a lot of different locations that we would normally identify, motel units in other towns that have been impacted, so it is a challenge we have to look in the eye and achieve successfully. From a recovery centre perspective, I'm glad to announce that the first recovery centre of many that will open, but the first recovery centre will be opening in Murwillumbah tomorrow at 8 o'clock for the Tweed Valley residents, and it's likely there'll be one opening over the next couple of days, maybe as early as the weekend in Mullumbimby for the Byron Bay residents. Now, these recovery centres have a whole range of different services for community members that can attend and be guided through the different opportunities that can be arise for them to help them achieve some sort of level of immediate and longer term recovery and build their single resilience individually. The local councils will work with so we can actually set up these recovery centres at the right time. We drove through on the way into this only an hour ago through Lismore and saw the energy and the efforts by community members that the Minister and the Premier spoke about, and whilst it's quite challenging to drive through those roads and challenging to see the debris that's out and the damage of infrastructure and family homes, it's admirable and really, really amazing to see the people that are out there, the community members that are out there in their Wellingtons, they've got their sleeves rolled up and they're working together as a group of people with the combat agencies coming in. As the Minister said, there's over 600 personnel from combat agencies, Royal Fire Service fire rescue supporting the Combat Agency, SES and 280 ADF, and they will really get in over the next few days, and you will start to see different changes to those roads in those towns. There's more in other towns, so the clean-up starts to begin, and then the challenge of longer-term recovery does begin.
I'll keep my remarks brief, but yes, I think we can all say that the heroes are back there, and the agencies, the 14 agencies that have been working out of this SES and SES headquarters across the region. And just to say my heartfelt thanks as the member for Ballina to all of our frontline responders, and of course our community, who are the real hero in the way that they've rallied. I really want to say to the Premier and the Minister, thank you for coming. We're so grateful, and I'm incredibly impressed. And I must say, we come from different areas of politics, but the Premier has been amazing, and also the Minister. And so I believe them when they say that they are listening to us and that they're going to take action on the gaps in the future. I'm certainly not going to forget those gaps, but I'm really pleased to see that in the last 48 hours, we're starting to see now that people can get in the support that we require. So I just, on behalf, I want to say that we know that there's problems, and I'm confident that with the minister in her new role, that we'll have that focal point and start to really see, and with Resilience New South Wales, start to see the swift changes we need. I'm very concerned that we could see thousands and thousands of people that require homes in an area where we already have such incredible housing stress. The Premier has listened to that, and I know that he's going to do everything he can to make sure that people have that accommodation. And moving forward, I think that starts a very powerful conversation we need about the housing crisis in our area. The Mayor of Ballina has been doing an amazing job, as has the Mayor of Byron. Councils have been unbelievable, and a shout out to Essential Energy, who have been like just ninjas, and everyone who's played a part. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. This gives me an opportunity to thank the heroes of the organisations. As Tamara said, we had 14 agencies working out of here. The local surf clubs we had, the police are still here, the ambulance service, rural fire service, have absolutely been wonderful in the areas that we couldn't get into, particularly in the Wardell area, where we had over 600 people evacuated to a makeshift evacuation centre, and they were looked after by the locals. All the other services, and it's a real pleasure and an honour to serve with such great communities. The community spirit has been overwhelming with the support. Every time we turn around, somebody, a restaurant or locals have brought in food for us, and we even had this as a transit park for evacuees that were being brought in by the Army in big trucks, dropped off here and then shipped to an evacuation centre. It was just overwhelming to see the generosity of the community, and it's going on and on, the offers. The people in the Woodburn area that went out and helped during the night in their own boats to rescue people who were in dire straits, and that's been a thing all over the North Coast, as I know of. But the real heroes have been the volunteers and the fire brigades and the rural fire service, surf clubs. It's been tremendous effort, and I can never thank the SES crew I have here for what they've done. They put their lives on the line, been through very emotional situations, and I am proud and honoured to be having them follow. It's been a tremendous effort. I've been with the SES for 38 years here. I've been through many bad storms, I've been through the Atlantic tornado, many other things, but this has been overwhelming for us all. Never ever expected what we've seen here in the last weeks. And again, I'd just like to thank everybody and all the support from the other agencies as well, and everybody, and the government, etc. Thank you very much.
Questions?
Premier, you haven't come with much of a plan. There are thousands of people homeless. in Ballina, in Lismore. What are you going to do about getting people out of evacuation centres? They could be there for months.
Well, we don't want to see that. And we're working day in, day out to ensure we get as many people in a temporary accommodation as quickly as possible. We're looking outside the box. In the old days, you just had Department of Community and Justice. That's not going to do it from my perspective. We're already working with providers and listening to local members in terms of where we can provide need. And it's not just on the supply side, it's also assisting families and people to get into housing by a range of different measures. So in our cabinet meeting yesterday, it's not just Department of Community and Justice looking at it, it's a whole of government response. If I look at the role that Steph Cook will play as we move forward, it's dealing with the immediate, the here and now, which is things like telecommunication, power, providing homes for people, mental health issues as well. Jerry just spoke about the mental health and the issues that many people will face going through such a traumatic experience. Infrastructure, we have still, as we go across the Northern Rivers, there's many roads, there's many bridges that have been washed away. This is going to be a mammoth task. This is the first time we could get in, seeing those and hearing those issues on the ground. We've obviously been through discussions with local members, with local councils about where those issues are, but the clean-up operation is beginning just now. This is a multifaceted crisis that's going to take a lot of work, not just in dealing with those the short-term issues. And actually, I don't want to see anyone in an evacuation centre any day longer than they need to. I want people in homes as quickly as possible, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
Premier, there are people with no businesses, no homes. They don't even have an idea to get money out of the bank. They were expecting funding today. Do you have anything to offer?
Well, we signed the agreement yesterday, obviously, with the federal government in relation to Cat D funding, and that goes all the way across the board. As I've said, through Service New South Wales, and that's the place for people to visit. I made it very clear yesterday that I don't want this to be in some bureaucratic language. I want people to understand where to go, where to get that assistance, and how much assistance is available to them. I don't want there to be any gaps at all. I've had numerous discussions with the Prime Minister, and I want to thank him. I want to thank him because he has said that, whatever support or any additional support that we need, the Commonwealth will assist us with. We are writing back to them this evening. In fact, as soon as we leave here, I'll be sitting down with the Minister and going through that final, the first tranche of additional support that we need in addition to what we've already set out. But I want money in the hands of people as quickly as possible, and that's what we will do. It's not going to be easy, and you know what? I'm sure mistakes will get made. That is just the scale of what needs to be done here is so significant that not everything's going to be perfect. But my job and the Minister's job is to make sure we work as hard as we can to get people into homes, to get money out the door, to get the clean-up occurring as quickly as possible, to get people back on their feet, to get businesses back open again, to get the roads built again, to get the bridges back. I mean, this is going to be a substantial task. Haven't even touched on the labour and the utility support we're going to need. We had labour shortages before we came into these issues, but rest assured we're going to do everything we can to get people back on their feet. And I know it's going to be tough. And in some ways as well, the event's not finished. We're still seeing flooding in other parts of New South Wales, but we're not going to rest. Our job in government is to stand side by side. When we need to work as hard as these guys worked from the SES, saving lives and keeping people safe. And that's exactly what we're going to do. And I don't want to see anything get lost in bureaucratic red tape. This is about moving fast, cutting through, getting support to where it's needed as quickly as possible. And that's what we're going to do.
Emergency services
Tomorrow.
You've been there, I thought that might be a priority, not to discredit how we're doing, but it is a war zone. I think we're building the public surely
No, we flew into Coolangatta and drove to Ballina. This is the first day we've been able to actually get in on the advice of the SES. I accept your point, but my job as Premier as well is not to get in the way and I'll take the advice from the State Emergency Service in relation to the role that I play. And I absolutely, and that's absolutely, and I'll be on the streets there tomorrow. I've come as quickly as I've been able to, not based on other priorities, but based on the advice that I've received from the emergency services. I flew into Grafton on Wednesday. I wanted to come further north, but was advised I couldn't do that, and that was from the emergency services. So I've said from the outset, I've been in constant communication with our local members, with local councillors. I've been speaking to many businesses. In fact, I was on the phone just early this morning to a local businessman in Lismore who was hit with the first flood. He's now hit with the second flood. He doesn't know whether he can go again. I'm personally meeting with him tomorrow, as I will meet with many business owners.
Premier.
Are you going to be asking questions as to how that's happened? Because I've met people who suddenly listening to young parents screaming about I don't understand.
I think, Premier, too, what people are asking, notwithstanding the efforts of volunteers and the community and 14 agencies involved, was when they rang the SES, they were either put on hold, they had to hang up and ring 000. They ring 000 and they don't get help. We spoke to a woman today who was 38 weeks pregnant on her roof with 2 kids. She had a call back today about the 000 call she made while the floods were up to her neck in her roof, and she was wondering how she'd get out. Do you accept there's been systemic failure here?
Well, it's completely unacceptable. That shouldn't happen.
But has there been systemic failure here?
I'll look through that, but clearly that is completely unacceptable.
There are dozens of people saying this. Dozens and dozens and dozens of people.
I agree, and that shouldn't happen. That shouldn't happen.
And resources-wise, for instance, Lismore SES, they have 2 fit-for-purpose rescue boats. Do you think that's enough? Do you think that's enough in a flood-prone area?
No, well, I mean, obviously we take the advice from the State Emergency Services.
So would you be better resources?
Yeah, well, on the advice that we receive, we provide them that financial support through the budget, as we always have. And I can certainly say during the period of time that I was in my previous role as Treasurer, we put record budget after record budget based on the advice that's received. We'll always take the advice from the State Emergency Services, from our emergency service organisations in relation to the support they need.
But it seems they don't have enough, like barely enough. It seems like they're going to need a huge budget.
Yeah, well, and my view in relation to that is that you should be budgeting for the worst possible event. You need to resource, and the reality is, the reality is that when a 1 in 500 year event or a 1 in 1,000 event occurs, there will always be challenges. The role of government is to minimise that, to learn from areas, and there is no doubt from my perspective, and hearing things on the ground even today in relation to coordination, that there should have been better coordination on the ground. I've heard that loud and clear. When you go through these massive events, you've got to sit back at the end of it, learn from it, and make sure that when these situations occur, that we're better off for it. But to hear a story about a pregnant woman sitting on a roof, I mean, I heard no.
But also just
no, and I've heard stories. I've heard stories through the week. I've heard tragic stories today. Right? These, they're terrible. They're awful, and they should never happen. And the role of government is to make sure that we are that the best planning is in place for the worst possible situation. There's so many factors here. I mean, there's preparation, then there's the immediate response, and that's going to take a period of time. We still have communities here that are isolated, completely isolated, that can't be reached.
But do you think it's acceptable
to get help, or ringing friends going, can someone, can you find someone to help us? We've run out of water in an evacuation centre.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing right now to help them?
Working very closely with you, and over the last 48 hours, these stories were coming through on Wednesday. The issue we had earlier in the week was we couldn't get choppers into the air because it was unsafe to fly based on the weather conditions. The federal government, through the ADF, were able to provide essential supplies into those evacuation centres. That took longer than anyone would have liked. But this was an extraordinarily difficult situation.
Apparently, Bridget McKenzie says there's 2,080 entries ready to go, and that she just needs the states.
So that, yeah, today there's 900 people, additional people on the ground. No, there's a component of ADF. 250.
Already at their bases, ready to go. So where are they? And why weren't they there 3 days ago?
Well, no, the advice I've received and the discussions I had with the Prime Minister is but we have a centre at the moment at Homebush, the State Emergency Operations Centre, that is working side by side with the federal government in terms of support. And you have the head of the SES, Carleen York, Commissioner Carleen York, working with the head of the emergency centre from a federal government level. It is a combined effort. We have daily phone calls with local councils, with their mayors, with their general managers. The Minister and I were on those calls last night with local members, doing everything we can to provide as much support as we can as possible, as quickly as possible. Those discussions are already underway. We are never going to say no to additional support. We want additional support. We've said that from the outset. And the federal government has been incredibly supportive, not just on a personnel perspective and a coordination perspective, but in addition to that, a financial support as well. It's going to be, this is an incredibly tough time. People are hurting, and it's, and for many, we're going to go from the emotional trauma and shock to, for many people going home, many would have lost their homes. Many will go home to utterly devastating scenes. And we're going to do everything we can to stand side by side to get people and every community back on track. It's not, and I know it's not going to be easy, but we're going to work bloody hard to get it done.
Just in terms of whether it was acceptable on Monday morning that basically in Lismore, people were saved by untrained civilians. Many more people would have died if it hadn't been for the community. Is that acceptable to you, that there wasn't anybody else there helping, that basically they saved themselves?
Well, no, it's not. But in addition to that, Ash, I think you've got to look at the advice we're receiving on the day, is that it's incredibly difficult to get support in based on the weather conditions that occurred and the immense nature of this event. That we were having those discussions about getting more boats into the water. There weren't two. That report on 2 boats is wrong. My understanding is there were 7. Now, whether that's enough or 2-7, we'll take the advice. Obviously, when we get through this, we'll do a review in relation to what resourcing was in place and what needs to be in place going forward. But I remember very early on, earlier in the week, when we're having obviously those intense discussions around what could we do, we just couldn't get anything into the air. We couldn't. We had pregnant women sitting on rooftops and people in dire situations. But from the advice we were receiving, it was impossible to be able to get aircraft into the skies to provide assistance based on the weather event that was occurring.
But what happened? This was happening in Brisbane. There was a weather event. It was moving down. We knew that was the case. Lismore floods.
Yeah.
So why wasn't? Isn't this a catastrophic failure of the emergency response in terms of Sunday not putting anything in place properly?
Well, I wouldn't say that yet. I mean, what's important, and I certainly will be doing this as Premier. I mean, our focus right now is not to play a blame game. Our focus right now is
It's
to
not
get...
so much about blame, it's about making sure it doesn't happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and this is what people are angry,
Yeah.
people are upset, they're traumatised by either watching elderly neighbours or parents stuck on roofs and they're ringing 000 and they can't get help, so they're forced to ring friends to say, please can you go and rescue someone? But this is not so much about blaming, it's about getting the system in place. So
Absolutely. And that's exactly what I've said. I don't want to see this happen again. But I want to get... When I'm talking about that, let me just finish the answer. you've got to look back once you go through these situations, just like we've done with the fires and floods of the past, and say, well, what went well, what didn't go so well, and what can we do to ensure that we provide as much protection as possible for communities that, in a state, in a nation, that
Could
faces...
we see the SES resource like the RFS?
What was that?
Could we see the SES resource like
I'll
the RFS?
resource every area of government to a level that's going to provide protection to people in our state. And you know, I certainly know from my previous time in those roles that I can't recall a time when something was not that. We've always provided the support based on the advice of the State Emergency Services, based on the RFS. We've always had record budgets to provide that support. But ultimately, through these events, in terms of, I'm not going to be sitting here today as Premier and sitting down with the SES Commissioner or the RFS Commissioner and saying, oh, what could have happened here? What I'm talking about, Lane, that's not what I'm saying. Is my focus right now as Premier of the state is to get everyone back on their feet as quickly as possible. Now, as we move through, my commitment is that anything that we've learned, anything that could have been planned better, that we will learn from that and make changes. I mean, I don't want to see any of these scenes happen again. Now, the reality is, in the country that we live in, whether it's drought, fires, floods, they are around us all the time. The role of the government is to make sure that we protect our community to the best that we can, and that's 100% what I'm committed to.
Premier, right now there are still people stranded in their homes. They've been there for 5 days. We're out of the phone reception to get help. Today's the first day in some of those communities we've seen any emergency workers getting there. Do you think that's good enough? I take into account that you said, you didn't have enough warning, but still, it hasn't rained heavily for a couple of days. It's day 5. Do you think it's good enough that some communities are only just seeing emergency workers in there?
I can certainly see why you could say it's not. But ultimately as well, and I can tell you that the amount of discussions that there's been, everyone's been working around the clock, and the issue of getting personnel in here has obviously been front and centre for us, where you've been completely focused on getting as many people on the ground as quickly as possible. But ultimately as well, we've got to take the advice from the head of the State Emergency Service, from the head of the RFS, from the head of the ADF in terms of safety. Like, you have to take that advice. And, that's hard. And all I can say is that on every step of the way, when I've received that advice, I've thoroughly tested it.
We've spoken to people who've paid over $10,000 to arrange a helicopter to save their lives while they were still waiting for emergency services. Do you think that's good enough? No, I don't. But I do know. What I do know is what I do know is that we couldn't get aircrafts into the skies. We just couldn't. We couldn't do it. We were sitting there watching these terrible scenes, and based on the advice of our emergency services personnel, we just couldn't, based on safety, we couldn't get them into the air. And that's a terrible thing to have happen. Do you think perhaps if the authorities could have been better prepared for the in terms of really getting help?
Yeah.
We knew that there was a big flood up in Ballina, up in Brisbane, and water goes south.
Yeah.
Do you think they could not have thought, oh, I should get some extra resources into this just in case?
Well, I tell what I do know. I know that our SES personnel, led by the Commissioner Carleen York, are the best in the business. And I've worked incredibly closely with them for many years.
That's not really answering.
Well, it is, in the sense that we follow their advice. They're the experts in relation to preparation. They're the experts in relation to making sure as much work has gone into prevention to provide safety for the public, and they are on the ground and they have the expertise.
What about fire and rescue? State
Yeah.
not volunteers. Should they have had more resources?
Well, what I would say in relation to that is there will be definitely a review in relation to, you know, what was here and what should have been here. And that happens with every natural disaster we go through. And there are things where you'll sit there, and when we go back through this, and I'll sit back and the minister will look at it and will reflect on, okay, well, what couldn't have been prevented, and what could have helped, and ensure that going forward, whatever could have been present that would have provided greater assistance, then you resource into that. That's just exactly what a good government would do.
The warning system that went out to vendors, because there were clearly, South was more and New Zealand generally, there's a lot of elderly people. There are a lot of people who were fast asleep, and they got an evacuation order at 12:43 a.m. thinking, which word on the street was, it's not going to breach, so it's not going to get that big a flood, or if it breaches, it'll be text messages are clearly inadequate because people didn't get them. Like, some people just didn't even get one on their phone, and some people were fast asleep. Older people often don't have mobile phones, don't have, understand the text message system. That they were clearly didn't get a warning because they were water over their necks, and some of them died. So, is this going to be something? Can you admit that it was inadequate warning?
Well, I think so. This has certainly been discussed, given the rapid time in terms of the period of time from the evacuation warnings to the evacuation orders. But obviously, it was a fast, rapidly evolving situation. But once again, I'd say to your question, everything would be reviewed going forward based on the circumstances that we faced. And where things can be done better, of course they will be going forward, and they'll be resourced to do that.
Final questions, please, guys.
Look, obviously Resilience New South Wales has been set up, and there has been questions about it this week. But did they play a role early on, or are we just expecting them to now to try and help in the aftermath? I think there's confusion exactly the role of Resilience New South Wales. Shouldn't we have built through Resilience New South Wales a better preparation as well?
I mean, Resilience New South Wales, as you know, has only recently been established. And the idea behind Resilience is to play a role in planning and prevention, but also in recovery and coordinating all government agencies. And that's certainly my expectation as Premier.
And the other, I have
Final ones, please.
Shane Stone, government disaster said today that people are living in flood zones. The house falls in the river and they say it's the government's fault. Australians need to have an honest conversation about where and how people build homes. The taxpayer and ratepayer cannot continue to pick up the bill for these huge catastrophic damage events. Do you agree, and would you be considering resuming properties in flood zones?
Oh, look, I'll take advice on that. Obviously, it's a balance. I mean, we've got a whole lot of areas right across our state, right across our nation, where we have development in flood-prone areas. Clearly, that development should be minimised as much as possible. That development should be minimised as much as possible. And we always face this with every flood. The same argument could be placed in relation to when we have severe bushfire seasons. There's always a balance that needs to be in place, but these are always good times as well to, once you're through them, to reflect and look at potential changes in policy off the back of it. I think that would only be the right thing for a government to do.
Thanks everybody.